Talking about preference assessments. So before I start going over the PowerPoint, I want to talk about why preference assessments are used and why they're important. They're extremely important because they tell us what the child wants, what the child will work for, what reinforces the child. If we don't know what is reinforcing for the child, they're not going to be motivated to work for you. And that's going to make your session very long and very difficult. So we want to know what is reinforcing for each one of our kids, which is why preference assessments are so important. Another thing to think about with preference assessments is that you want to do them throughout your intervention because, like everyone, your clients' preferences are going to change. So perhaps they are really into Thomas the Train, and in a few months they're going to be really into Star Wars, and in a week they're going to be really into Paw Patrol. So it's going to change, and what once was reinforcing for your client may no longer be reinforcing for them anymore. And so you want to continue doing preference assessments. So today we're going to talk about the different preference assessments that you can conduct, and we're going to model how to actually conduct these preference assessments. So what is the difference between a reinforcement survey and a preference assessment? With a stimulus preference assessment, a stimulus is regarded as a reinforcer when the individual selects it more or spends more time with it than other stimuli. Stimuli identified during the preference assessment may or may not function as reinforcers for a particular response. So stimuli selected may serve as potential reinforcers. Let me go over this a little bit because it might sound a little bit confusing because they kind of sound exactly the same. What this is saying is that a stimulus or stimuli does not become a reinforcer unless that child selects that specific stimuli multiple times and engages with that stimuli for longer periods of time. So let me give you an example. You have a child who you know is interested in Darth Vader, and he has a Darth Vader toy. And that same exact child is also very interested in blocks. However, the child spends every single day playing with Darth Vader, and he loves Darth Vader, and he doesn't have access to Darth Vader all the time. So when he has access, he takes advantage because he loves Darth Vader. And he has the blocks, and he doesn't have access to the blocks all the time either, but he'll play with the blocks every once in a while when they're there. But Darth Vader is what he really wants. So we know Darth Vader is reinforcing. That's a reinforcer for that child. Whereas the blocks are probably not going to be that reinforcing, right? If you want this child to work for you, what is he going to be more willing to work for? Darth Vader or blocks? Most likely the Darth Vader. So a preference assessment. A preference assessment is a set of procedures that are used to determine if one or more stimuli may function to increase the rate of a specific behavior or behaviors when delivered following the occurrence of that behavior. So again, is the child going to be more likely and more willing to respond in a certain way because the child knows that he gets access to Darth Vader or not? Maybe, maybe not. That's why we do these preference assessments. In general, these procedures involve the presentation of one or more stimuli where the person is expected to select the item or stimulus that is preferred over the stimuli present. So there's a web page called Behaviorpedia where you can access reviewed research, and it has definitions and articles on there. So you can go on there and learn more about preference assessment as well as other ABA terms or ideas, theories. So continuing with preference assessments. So you don't want to ever assume that one favorite item or activity is preferred by everyone. So my kid loves Darth Vader. That doesn't mean that your kid loves Darth Vader. One activity that may be preferred to one client may be unpleasant to another. And you might know for your caseload that you have 3 kids that love to play kinetic sand. And so you bring your kinetic sand all the time, but now you're placed on a brand new case and you say, hey, my other 3 kids love this stuff. The kids I've worked with always love kinetic sand. And you go to this new case and you bring your kinetic sand and this kid doesn't like it. He's not interested, doesn't want to touch it, doesn't want to see it. It's different. So you never want to assume that what works for you in 3 of your sessions is going to work for you in your other one. This is why we want to conduct preference assessments, to identify those preferred items or activities to use as a reward or a reinforcer for appropriate behavior. So using the correct reinforcer, you present immediately after the behavior is exhibited, and this will continue to increase the behavior. So if your client knows every time I do this, this, and this, I get access to Darth Vader, I'm going to continue doing this, this, and this because that gets me access to Darth Vader. So these are the types of assessments that we're going to be going over today. The first one is the caregiver interview, the observation, single item, paired item, which is also known as fourth choice, and multiple choice. And this, we're going to talk about 2 different ones, with or without replacement. So the first one is the interview. So this is when you go and ask the parents what the child likes, what the child is interested in. And we've provided a handout for you. They're at the center of the table, so if you can each grab one of those. And this is a really good resource for you to have for all of your clients. A lot of the times, preference assessments are conducted during the FBA process. However, as mentioned earlier, you want to continue with preference assessments throughout your entire intervention because your clients' preferences are going to change. So the FBA perhaps was conducted 2 months prior to services or a month prior to starting services, and now the child is no longer interested in these things that were mentioned in the FBA. And you want to know that. That's going to make your sessions run smoother because your child's going to be more willing to work if you are going to reinforce the child with what it is that he or she wants. So you want to interview the caregiver, the parents, whoever's around the child's environment and who knows the child well, so that you know what the child likes. The second one is observation. This is a type of assessment. Watching the child. What does the child look for? What does he want to play with? What is he interested in? Is he only playing with his blocks, or does he play with blocks and then move on to puzzles because he loves puzzles? And hi, now you notice he played with the puzzle for 10 minutes and he was only playing with the blocks for 5 minutes. So you learn a lot from observing. So for the single item preference assessment, it's also considered or thought of as the successful choice. It's the quickest and easiest assessment. So each item is presented one by one several times in random order, and time spent with each item is recorded. So I'm going to give you an example of this, and then we will model for you how to conduct single item preference assessment. So here I have a ball, I have the tablet, and I have a coloring book, okay? So my child is, or the client that I'm working with is, we're sitting here on the floor, and I give the child the ball. And here I have my timer, my watch, my phone, whatever it is that you can use. Be careful about using your phone in session though, because a lot of parents aren't okay with that. So if you have a watch, that's great, or if you have one of those little timers, the kitchen timers work great. So you give the child the ball that you brought, and you hit start on your stopwatch, or you just check the time. And the child plays with the ball for 35 seconds. So you're going to write 35 seconds on your sheet of paper. He throws the ball, he's no longer interested, and now you're going to present the child with the tablet or the iPad. And the child plays on the tablet for 5 minutes. You're going to record 5 minutes, and you're going to fade the child away from that tablet, because now we know, okay, he's definitely into that tablet, and we're going to prime him. Okay, we're going to do tablet for another minute, let's say, and so now you've added time, so maybe now it becomes 6 minutes. So take the tablet away, and then now you're going to give the child access to the coloring book with the coloring pencils. And the child engages in this activity for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. So you're going to record that. So out of those 3 items, what was most reinforcing for the child? The tablet. Why? How do we know that? That's the one that child spent the most time on. So let's say you don't present the tablet, because that would be probably difficult for the child to transition from, right? So you do the ball, you do the coloring books, and you do Play-Doh, and he spends 4 minutes with Play-Doh. What's reinforcing? The Play-Doh, because that's what the child spent the most time playing with. So now we're going to talk about paired choice. So with paired choice preference assessments, you present the client with 2 different stimuli at an equal distance from him or her and from each stimulus. So here I have a ball and I have the Play-Doh. So I'm going to put both of them in front of the client, and they are both at equal distance from the client and from each other. So you provide the child a few seconds to choose. So here your SD would be pick one, choose one, which one. And then once the client picks one of them, you allow them to engage with that stimuli for a few seconds, so approximately 30 seconds. And then you remove the other item. So the child has the ball and the Play-Doh here in front of them, and the child picks up the ball. So you're going to allow them to play with that ball for 30 seconds, and then you're going to remove the Play-Doh. So then if the child doesn't choose either one, you allow the client to engage with the items separately for a few seconds. So let's say I have the ball and the Play-Doh and the child doesn't pick any when I say choose one or pick one. So what's going to happen then is I'm going to give the client the ball, see how long he plays with that, take it away, or he's going to throw it because he's not really into it, and then I'm going to give the client the Play-Doh and see how long he engages in that, and he throws it because he's not into it. Okay, so that's what you're going to do. It's a paired choice. So let's say they still don't choose an item. You begin the process by choosing new items, and you begin at step 1. So let's say you're like, okay, well, I did that, and as soon as I give him the ball, he threw it. He's not interested at all, and the Play-Doh he wouldn't even touch. So, okay, he's definitely not into a ball or into the Play-Doh. So now I'm going to bring 2 different items. So now I am going to present the child with bubbles, and I'm going to present the child with trains. And you do exactly the same thing. You provide the child a few seconds to make a choice. They make a choice. You remove the one they didn't choose, and you continue with your preference assessment that way. So now we're going to talk about multiple choice with replacement. These get a little tricky, so with and without replacement get a little tricky. So please let me know if you need more clarification. I'll try to explain it as in the most simple form so that we can all understand it. So multiple choice with replacement. This is an extension of the paired method, and there are 3 or more items to choose from. So here I have my items in front of me. I have the ball, I have the Play-Doh, and I'm going to do bubbles, okay? Ball, Play-Doh, and bubbles. And let's do one more actually. I'm going to add train. So I have ball, Play-Doh, bubbles, and trains. So when an object is selected, all the other objects are replaced in the next trial. So I'm going to give you an example. The child is presented with iPad, Legos, Play-Doh, and the cars. So the child chooses Legos, and then the next trial, the iPad, the Play-Doh, and the cars would be replaced with train, bubbles, and ball. The Legos would not be replaced. So I'm going to go over that with the stimuli that I have in front of me right now. So I have ball, Play-Doh, bubbles, and train, okay? And I present all 4 of these in front of the child, and the child chooses to go with train. Okay, so the child picks up the train, he's playing with the train, he's engaged with the train. I'm going to take away the other 3 items that the kid did not select. So he didn't choose the bubbles, he didn't choose the Play-Doh, and he didn't choose the ball. So I'm going to remove those 3 items, okay? So he's playing with trains. I'm going to allow the child to play with the item for a few minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. And I'm going to prime him. Okay, Johnny, we only have 30 more seconds with train. You're priming the child. So now you are going to take the train away. And before this, let me just give you a little tip. Make sure you have all of your other stimuli set up ready to go for the child to make the next choice. Because what you don't want to happen is you take the train away and then now you have to go back and put out all of the next choices. It's better to just have it ready to go. So you say 30 more seconds, and what you've done while Johnny's been playing with the train is you have given now Johnny different choices, okay? So now Johnny's choices are going to be coloring, book, iPad, and let's say we're going to use blocks. Okay, so what I did is I changed all of the stimuli, right? So I no longer reintroduced the ball, the Play-Doh at all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce new objects and I'm going to return the trains back to the new line of choices. So what this means, multiple choice with replacement, is that whatever the child did not choose, you're going to get rid of and replace. So the only item that you're not replacing is the one that the child did choose. So the child chose train. Train's still going to be an option for that child. I'm only replacing what the child did not choose. I got rid of the ball. I got rid of the bubbles. I got rid of the Play-Doh, right? And I replaced it with new things, except the train. The train is still a choice now. I hope that makes sense. And let me know if it doesn't. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is multiple choice without replacement. So again, this is going to be you presenting 3 items or more to the child. The child chooses one, and the therapist records how long the child engages with that item. So once the child loses interest, you represent the child with the other items, leaving out the one that was already chosen. So this is what the difference is between without replacement and with replacement. So without replacement, earlier the child chose the train. I wouldn't put the train back in. Without, I'm not replacing the train. With replacement, I am replacing the train. The child chose the train, I'm putting it right back. It's still an option. Without replacement, the train is already chosen. It's no longer an option for the kid a second time. Does that make sense? Okay. So no new items are available. Without replacement, no new items are available. So I'm going to give an example here. So let's say I'm presenting my kid with bubbles. So here I have my bubbles, cars, Play-Doh, and blocks. So here I have my 4 different stimuli. And the child chooses the blocks. So I'm going to remove all other items. So I'm removing the bubbles, I'm removing the cars, and I'm removing the Play-Doh. The child is engaged with blocks. Okay, I'm going to record the time the child engages with the blocks. The child is playing with the blocks now for 3 minutes and 27 seconds. I'm going to write that down. And then he's over the blocks, not interested anymore. So I'm going to remove the blocks, take those away, and now I'm going to present the child with the bubbles, the cars, and the Play-Doh. So what's the difference here? The blocks are no longer introduced. So it went from having 4 choices to having 3 choices. Now the child only has the choice between bubbles, cars, and Play-Doh. So you continue to do this until you get through all the items. So let's say next the child chooses to take the Play-Doh. So he plays with the Play-Doh. I'm going to take away the bubbles and the cars, and he's playing with the Play-Doh for 5 minutes and 7 seconds. I'm going to record that. So now it seems like Play-Doh is a lot more interesting to my kid than blocks. He's over the Play-Doh. He doesn't want to play with Play-Doh anymore. So I'm going to reintroduce the bubbles and the cars. And the child chooses cars. I'm going to take the bubbles away. He takes the cars and he throws the car against the wall after playing with it for 11 seconds. I'm going to write 11 seconds down. And now the child only has one choice, which is what? The bubbles. So you see, I'm not replacing anything. That's why it's called without replacement. The child, once he or she has made that choice, that stimuli is no longer available for the child to choose again a second, a third, a fourth time. So now the child doesn't have another choice but bubbles. So the child takes the bubbles and he opens the bubbles, he's playing with the bubbles, and he plays with the bubbles for 1 minute and 15 seconds. So at the end of that assessment, what have you learned? You've learned that the most preferred item of those 4 was the Play-Doh because he played with the Play-Doh for the longest. So that's the biggest difference between multiple choice without replacement and with replacement. Without replacement, think about it as process of elimination. Once you've chosen something, it's no longer available. Whereas with replacement, it's you choose and whatever you chose is still available, but the other stimuli that are presented are completely new from your first choices, okay? So we're going to model these for you at the end of this presentation so that you guys can kind of see, because I know that it's a lot to take in, and when you see it modeled for you, it'll be better and you'll understand a lot more of what we're saying. But hopefully this is making sense as we go along. So we've created this list of helpful hints for you when conducting preference assessments. So you want to conduct preference assessments with toys and activities and edibles separately. I love food. I know a lot of my kids love food, so I would not ever conduct a preference assessment that has a ball, bubbles, and a piece of chocolate, because I would always go for the chocolate. And I know a lot of my kids would also go for the chocolate. So you don't want to do that. You want to keep them completely separately. If you are doing a preference assessment on food, then you're only going to introduce those edibles. So let's say you do chips, Hershey's Kisses, and gummies, right? It's all edibles. I would not do ball, gummies, chocolate, and Play-Doh. You don't want to mix the two up ever. You want to limit the access. So if an item is used as a reinforcer, if the client has free access to this item, it's going to lose the reinforcing value. So think about your sessions and what reinforces your kiddo. So let's say we're talking about the kid that loves Darth Vader, and he doesn't always get access to Darth Vader, which is why Darth Vader is still so reinforcing for our kid, because he doesn't have access to it all of the time. He only has access to it when he's earned it. It's become a reinforcer for him. And you've probably experienced this. You might have had kids who you had a marble maze for, and this marble maze was amazing. It was highly reinforcing for the client, and they'd be willing to do anything for you for that marble maze. And what happens is the parents see, oh my gosh, Johnny loves the marble maze, so they go out and they buy Johnny a marble maze, and now Johnny has access to the marble maze all of the time. So when you come on Monday for your session and you bring your marble maze and you tell Johnny you have to get 10 tokens in order for us to get the marble maze, he no longer wants to work for you. Why? Because when you leave, guess what? He has access to the marble maze. So you want to limit the access. If you do have something that you know the client is highly, highly reinforced by, let the parents know. If it's something that is in the home that you just discovered is reinforcing, let the parents know, hey, don't give this to Johnny when I'm not here, or only give it to him if he's done X, Y, and Z for you, and this is why we want to always communicate with the team, communicate with the supervisor, communicate with the PC on the case, so that the PC knows and they can work on that with parents, like, hey, the therapist told me that Johnny loves the marble maze, so let's make sure that if you are going to go out and buy a marble maze for him, he only gets it if he does equal amount of work for you. So that marble maze is still reinforcing, it still has that value. You want to provide small amounts of the reinforcer. So a few bites if you're using edibles, a few minutes of music, TV, we're going to continue with the example of the marble maze just because we're already on that one. Let's say he does earn the marble maze. You don't want to give him 30 minutes with the marble maze. You don't want to give him an hour with the marble maze. You're going to let him play with the marble maze for maybe 10 minutes, and then you're going to take it away and move on to the next thing. You rotate and vary the reinforcers. So items that act as a reinforcer will change over time. That's why we do preference assessments. These kids change. We all change. We change our minds about what we like. We become bored with things. We become tired of things. So if your client becomes bored with a certain item, it's going to lose its value, right? So if this client has access to the marble maze every single time you come to session, and your sessions with this client are Monday through Friday, it's going to become kind of a routine. Like, oh yeah, my therapist comes and I get marble maze, and that's all I get. I get marble maze every single time. The marble maze eventually is going to become a little boring for him or her, and it's going to lose its value. So you want to rotate what you use to reinforce your client. So maybe you know that marble maze is highly, highly reinforcing, but hey, you also know that Darth Vader is just as reinforcing, and you also know that, let's say, bubbles are highly reinforcing for this kid. So you're going to rotate those reinforcers, right? Like one day maybe he's going to earn the marble maze, the other day he's going to earn time with Darth Vader, the next day he's going to earn bubbles. It depends. It varies from client to client. So you have to really know your kid, and you want to assess them to see what their preferences are. So for the clients who don't find social attention reinforcing, you begin by pairing their favorite toys with social praise and social interaction. And over time, the social attention will hopefully become reinforcing. I say hopefully because this doesn't always happen. This is ideal. We always want to use what's most naturally reinforcing. And in the real world, when I do a good job at something, I love Darth Vader, but people don't give me Darth Vader toys, right? When I do something great, somebody says, hey, that was really good. Oh, I really like that. Good job. Oh, that was awesome. Hey, you're doing great. So it's more appropriate and it's more natural for people to just verbally praise us. And so we want our kids to have that same reinforcement long term. And so we want them to respond positively to social reinforcement, to social praise. So if you say, you did that was so awesome, you give him a high five, that was so cool, instead of giving him the marble maze, it's going to be a lot more appropriate, especially if this client is now 15 or 16, right? So you want to pair these things. You want to pair whatever favorite toy they have with that social praise and that social interaction. So now I'm actually going to talk about going back to the multiple choice with replacement and without replacement. I'm going to go back to that slide because now that I mentioned that, I forgot to mention that's very important for these two assessments. So for multiple choice, both with and without replacement, if you engage with the child with any of the activities that he or she chooses, you have to engage with all of the activities the child chooses. So let me explain that a little bit more. So here we have the bubbles, the cars, the Play-Doh, and the blocks, okay? And we said that our kid chose the blocks first, right? And the kid that we have chose blocks, and I decided to play blocks with the client. So I'm playing blocks, we're playing blocks, and then we continue with the assessment, and he chooses Play-Doh now. Guess what? Because I interacted with the client when he or she was playing blocks, I have to interact with the client when he or she is playing with the Play-Doh. So we're playing Play-Doh, and then my client's going to choose cars, I'm going to interact with the cars. And then my client chooses bubbles, I'm going to interact with the bubbles. So if you interact with one activity or one toy that the child chose, you have to interact with all of the other 3 or 4, depending on how many choices that child has. So if the child interacts with blocks and I let the child play alone, the child's going to play alone for Play-Doh, the child will play alone with cars, and the child will play alone with bubbles. Why is that so important? I'm going to go back to the helpful hints. The social part. We're pairing ourselves. Oftentimes what happens is that child played blocks for 5 minutes because I played blocks with him for 5 minutes. Maybe had I not played blocks with the child would have only played for 2 minutes. So we kind of become an influence, right? And we're pairing ourselves And we are a reinforcing component of that activity. And so if the child plays with Play-Doh and they're playing for a minute, however, when I played with them the last time I did a preference assessment, they played for 3 minutes. It changes. So this happens all of the time. So when you are working on your reinforcement becoming more natural, more social, more that social attention, that praise, you're going to pair the toys with that praise. So the child is playing Play-Doh and you're going to say, hey, that's awesome, good job, because you're going to become reinforcing and you playing with that child is reinforcing. So why are preference assessments so important? We talked about this at the beginning. It's important to know what the client is interested in, and it's important to know what will reinforce your child and what's going to motivate him or her. So this is kind of just a review. Ongoing preference assessments should be conducted throughout services as the client's potential reinforcers and interests may or may not change. We talked about this, and I cannot stress this enough because I've seen this where I go out to a session and the client is really into a certain toy or a character, a Disney character or a character from a show, and then I come out in another week and a half and I'm thinking, oh, this kid is really into that still, and the parent's like, oh, no, that doesn't motivate. That doesn't motivate her anymore. Now she's into this. So they change. I mean, it could be months, it could be weeks, it could be a couple of days. I've had cases where I come in and the next day the therapist says, oh yeah, he was into that, really into that for a day, and then no longer. So it happens, and it's important for us to know what they like. So now we're going to have you guys get into pairs. One person is going to be the therapist and the other is going to be the client, and we want you to practice conducting the preference assessments provided to your group. So I'm going to go around and assign a different preference assessment to each group, and when you're finished, we're going to share with the group, and we're going to talk about what you found helpful and what was difficult about the preference assessments. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to get into these groups. I'm going to model each one of these preference assessments for you. I kind of have been throughout the presentation, but I'm going to model them for you consecutively, and then you're going to imitate. And I'm going to walk around and see how you are doing, and let me know if you have any questions or talk about what was difficult and what was helpful. I'll give you a few minutes. Okay. So let's talk about things that you found difficult because it seems like it's universal. The time, recording the time. You guys said it might be difficult. Okay, so what I did is I created this document for you, and they're at the table if you can each grab one. And what it has is a section for you to list the items that you're going to be using for your assessment, and then it has a date, and then it has the time for duration, and that's for how long. So keep this as a tool also, so that when you are having these assessments and you are conducting these preference assessments in your session, you can have this piece of paper and it's really simple. You list the stimuli that you're using. So today I would have listed ball, bubbles, train, cars, what else do I have? Play-Doh, and then I would have listed the duration, right? And so again, if you have a phone, use your phone. If you have a watch, use your watch. Whatever is easier for you, you can get a stopwatch. You're not going to be conducting a preference assessment every single session, although that would be great because it would change. You might have to, it depends on your kid. But it should be a good idea. It would be a good idea to have it at least once every week or maybe once every other week. And you'll see that once you get the hang of it and you're doing it constantly, it's not that difficult to keep track of the time. And that's why we had you guys practice here today so that you feel a little bit more comfortable. And it's, again, use whatever tool you need to keep track of the time and whatever's going to be easier for you. So do you have any questions, comments, feedback? Okay, well, thank you all for coming today. That was our presentation on preference assessments. Please feel free to stay after if you do have any questions for me. Everybody have a great day. Thank you.